For being late. I'm fighting my contacts today, and they are winning. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised at that. They have me outnumbered 2-1. I've been fighting with those. So if I have to go and look at things a long way, don't think I've gone Hollywood. These are the only prescription glasses I have, and they're tinted, so I'll look a little strange inside wearing those. So hopefully I'll be looking at things close to me. Thank you for everyone coming down here on an off day. I know there have been some other meetings around, and we wanted to take a look at this report we have before us. That will be the item we have on the agenda today, unless the committee has anything else that we wish to review. Does everybody have a copy of that in their packet? Everybody should have a copy of that. Well, if I can, and let me give your proper thanks to Tara here for putting the report together, and Representative Gilligan for putting it together. And do you mind if I call on you to introduce it for us? So I had, you're welcome to do it from your seat. If the committee will recall, we had a meeting earlier, and I think I shared the information that the speaker had passed along from Representative Chaffetz, and we're trying to get some information. What we found after we left was they wanted us to get something sooner than later to them, and that was by the middle of March. So we have a report that I'll let the representative go over, but this will probably be the first step in the process because we don't have any numbers attached to the cost, only things identified. So I'm going to turn it over to the representative now to do that. And if anybody in the audience wishes to speak to it, we'll certainly allow that at this point as well. And after the committee has had a chance today to look at the report, we will make the report available to the public. Representative, number 19.
19.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the people in the back of the room. We had ACCG and GMA both give us some really good information about the impacts to their municipalities or to the counties on the unfunded mandates. None of the information I received, however, did have a number attached. So everything that I received talked about the impacts, but did not have a dollar amount, with a very few exceptions on it. But again, we had great information from that. And then the bulk of the report that you have in front of you actually came from the NCSL, so the state legislative body there. And that was, once again, really great information with very few exceptions, no dollar amounts listed, however. So if we want to go to the report itself, and by the way, I have all these things that I've been studying. Everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act, and it was revised in 2016. So this is something that the federal government was supposed to, in all of their legislation now, consider the impact to not just the state, county, and city governments, but also to the private sector. And that is one segment, by the way, we do not have covered in this report. I have reached out to the Chamber of Commerce to see if they could give us some information, but as you know, this is kind of a busy time of year for everyone, and so far they have not been able to come back with information on how it impacts the private industries when you have unfunded mandates. Let's say that minimum wage requirement, that would be an unfunded mandate to the private sector. Again, I don't have that information yet. But anyway, Congress passed the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act so that they would indeed have to report out, and the Congressional Budget Office would have to do reports and studies on how much would legislation cost if they indeed were enacted. The thing is, as with any good intention, there is always a way around that good intention. So we still have some requirements that don't necessarily fall under the Unfunded Mandate Reform Act as written, but they still have impacts on our government entities. So we wanted to capture all of those things, and I believe that's what we have. So if you have the report in front of you, it's about 37, 38 pages, and we start out with agriculture. By the way, I am not saying whether or not these mandates are good. I'm not saying anything along those lines. I'm just saying that there is an impact when the federal government enacts some kind of law, and we wanted to capture that for the state. So we start with agriculture. We talk about some of the pesticides, some of the regulations, and how that affects our industry there. We have it on banking, which starts on page 2. I don't know if anybody has looked at any of these in detail. If you had questions about it, I'm assuming everybody received the email from the chairman. Okay. If you notice, we have defense on page 3, and then we have veterans on page 37. If you want to, we could merge those together or put them just like we did with human services, and then right after it is human services hyphen food stamps. If you wanted, we could do defense hyphen veterans and put those together. My only reason for suggesting that is because when we get down to veterans, we talk about extending benefits, but we also talk about doing benefits for our reservists under the defense. So we categorized it based on where in the code it was impacted, but we could always make that kind of shuffling if y'all wanted to do that. Again, so we have defense on page 3. A lot of that is, again, we want to support our veterans, but there is a cost involved whenever you do some of these mandates here, like requiring that they get tax-free. It's on the property. Which one was it on? I'm trying to remember which line it was. I'm sorry, there's no line numbering on this, and I did not capture that. But there are certain provisions that we give to our veterans that does indeed have a cost to our governments. The biggest category would have to be on page 7, the environment. Everything to do with the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, all of those particular acts. Again, I am not saying whether they are good or bad. I'm just documenting all of these mandates. So that would have to be the largest section. Education also is a fairly large section. Education begins on page 4. So I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth a little bit, but I just didn't know what kind of questions or concerns that anybody had on what we had gathered here.
Let me ask you, if the representative doesn't mind, as she steps through the report, if it were okay, if you have a question about a particular section or see something that piques your interest in, that you would have a question, if you press her button, we'll do that as she goes by. We've garnered one. Representative Fraser, is that you? I can't tell what number it is. Yes, ma'am.
Number 16. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am actually looking for that piece about the exemptions for military.
Yeah. Let me get it for you.
And I see several of
It's
them,
under
but
defense.
It would be under defense. And
I don't see it there. It might be.
there was about... Okay, on page 3, it's the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2008. It's 3 up from the bottom. It increases the total of active duty and reservist, which may reduce state revenue due to tax deferral.
Oh, okay. So that actually means what now?
When we give tax deferred status to our active duty military personnel so that they can enjoy some of their benefits tax deferred. But there is a cost involved in that. And so if you see, it's on page 3 here, but then if you go back to the veterans section as well, on page 37, you'll see, no, it wasn't in there, I'm sorry. But I was thinking if we had the veterans underneath the defense, so we could do defense hyphen veterans.
Yeah, put them together here.
Put them together, and that way you realize you're looking at 2 different things in the report.
So actually, what I'm I'm looking at it. These are all federal mandates that we actually supposed to be adhering to.
Yes.
And
And they either
And
are
we-
not funded at all, or
Right.
they are underfunded. Yes, ma'am.
and so that's causing a hardship on the state
And
as
the
it
county,
relates to trying to implement these mandates,
right,
these
or-
unfunded mandates,
right,
actually.
or on the county or on the state.
On the state, okay.
I'm sorry, on
on
the
our
city.
local, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, using that one, particularly, I think the portion of revenue that's lost there is the deferral. It's not at all to say that the active reservists aren't needed, for
Right.
the duties. So I think what the representative said earlier, and I think what is important for us to all understand is, as the committee looks at this today, we're not taking a position, is this a good thing or a bad thing? We're just, what they ask us for from the Oversight Committee in Congress was those things which have been done that impact your revenue, either take revenue away from you at the state, local, state or local level, or increase monies you have to expend. So things that they do that they don't send any money to pay for, or
Right.
that
What's the
take
impact?
money away from us without us taking a position on, is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Okay.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, if you do notice, though, the one right below that, I was saying very few had a dollar amount listed, but if you look at the FY 2005 Emergency Supplemental Appropriations for Defense, the Global War and Terror, and Tsunami Relief. And if you look at that, it was $100 million between 2005 and 2010, and $11 billion over 5 years was the estimate. So see, some of them do have dollar amounts, but they are the exception rather than the rule. And that's what I was trying to express earlier. On education, of course, we have the No Child Left Behind Act, which was then succeeded by the Every Student Succeeds Act. Again, now, if you were going by the strict definition of an unfunded mandate, I'm not sure that it falls under that. We wanted to capture these kinds of things, though, because there is that carrot and stick. You don't get the money unless you perform and do all the paperwork, but then you have the expense of doing all the paperwork and being in compliance. So there's a whole lot to be gauged there to understand even what we have. And if you notice, even on page 4, that very first one, it says the level of unfunded mandates to states is still being examined. So that's under the Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015. So we are still examining some of the costs to the various states and to Georgia in particular. By the way, when we went to the No Child Left Behind Act, we do have to recognize the fact that before that act had been passed, we only had to do paperwork and report on schools that were Title I schools, so schools that receive their funding or a lot of funding from the federal government. And that was about 35% of all public schools, and I'm not sure how many in the state of Georgia had been Title I schools, so how much of an increase. Yeah, I don't know how much of an increase it was to Georgia itself, but they did in their state that it was financially burdensome for states are the accountability requirements. So again, it said accountability. Yeah. On page 6, like I mentioned before, that category, that's where energy starts, and then immediately followed by the environment. And again, the environment, unfunded mandates, that was a very large section. Did anybody go through that and have any questions on what these unfunded mandates mean or how we might capture them differently?
The energy section?
The environment. I'm sorry. The energy was fairly straightforward. If you notice under environment, we have some that are on the books for a long time, 1955 on like the Clean Air Act amendments. So we went through all of them, even the older ones, if they're still active or if they have been added onto. So if there are suggestions on anything that we need to call out, to remove, let me know. Okay. So has everybody had an opportunity to look at the ones for our environment? Like I said, it's a large section.
And let me, if I can, just, I don't want to pick things, because we could all do that, and I know we do want to move along, but I'll give an example, and I'm not sure, let me get back to energy. I believe I am correct in saying this. One of the two, if not the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, I believe is that thing that was passed by the federal government that assessed a fee to utility companies that had nuclear facilities, so that they've collected money for over these years since that time from ratepayers, not really from the utilities. The utilities collect it, but they collect it from the ratepayers, from the people that send us up here, and those monies were for the national creation of a place to store spent nuclear fuel. If you're familiar with Yucca Mountain, that hole was dug, a fairly significant hole in the ground in Nevada. I believe 18 billion was spent on that.
I can't remember the number.
I know we're being recorded here, so I will say that I believe that is about the amount of money that was spent on that. It perhaps was a little more, a little less. And then because of a rather powerful senator from Nevada who just retired, all that money was spent to dig the hole in the ground and to build it, because that was good for the economy out there in Nevada. But when it came time to actually deposit radioactive materials in there, they decided they didn't want it. So our ratepayers have been paying for a long period of time for a place to put these spent fuels, as have ratepayers all over the country. And yet the federal government has yet to create that place. Right. So the spent fuel is staying on site, sometimes in the pools, sometimes in dry storage, but it's clearly, or I'll say in the opinion of the chair here, it is more dangerous to the public to have it spread around the country in dry storage or in pool storage than a place. So the question could be asked, if we're going to collect the fee, let's do it. Right now, I believe that fee is going just to prop up the general fund, or what we would call the general fund. It would be into the pool of money that is the national revenue stream, rather than have money to put the spent fuel. The lady from down around Augusta seems to have a question right with regard to that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and it's actually about the Clean Water Act.
Okay.
Which I think affects all of us. Representative Gilligan, can you share with me, I kind of went through this a little bit, but one of the concerns that we're having, and I know that this is a mandate also, but this is a mandate across the United States as it relates to the Clean Water Act, and we're having a lot of problems in our local systems with pollutants, and things are happening. So where are we with this Clean Water Act as far as meeting these mandates? Because we're what was it, Flint, Michigan, and other states that were having major problems with pollutants being put into the clean water. So was there any discussion about this, a little bit in depth, about where we should be now with the current mandates?
There was no discussion on where we are now with any of the mandates. Again, this was just a compilation of the mandates. So as of this moment, we haven't assessed, were they good, were they bad, do we need to continue them, are we meeting them? There was nothing like that, Representative Frazier.
I think
I can tell you they're not good. They're probably bad, and we probably do need to continue.
Well, nobody wants to drink dirty water.
No.
I think if I could just to tie this up, I think what the representative has brought, these are things that the federal government has passed and said you shall do these things. They didn't send any money to do those things. It is what sometimes happens in government. They pass something and they feel really good and they go home about it, but if it doesn't bring into practice what our citizens need, it's not really a good accomplishment. So I think each of these individually we could break down, and that one's probably going to land over in Chairman Smith's committee and Environment and the EPD in Georgia could talk
Right.
about their relationship with EPA. But you bring up a good point, Representative Fraser, in that the federal government sometimes do these things and then step away from it, and at the end of their session, move on, and yet it's not completed. So what we hope in this, the two things is what I believe they hope. Chairman Chaffet's committee hopes is to get us a list and so that they can look at them and address and see if they are really helping, and if they're not, what they need to do to help, and if they are helping, do they need to send more money? So I think there's a couple of different ways that we can do it. But for today, just to be clear with the committee, that the representative hasn't checked on the effectiveness of any of these. These are simply mandates that we've identified or we have consolidated from NCSL and other sources, ACCG, GMA, that are affecting the financial aspects of the state, and perhaps each of these will break down into various places around the state. State government, I should say, the House, to call into question exactly how it's impacting us. So that's a good one. I don't know if there's anybody on our committee that cross committees, if you will, with natural resources, but I think that's a good place to ask Chairman Smith to do that. So,
As a matter of fact, you have at least two of us.
okay, there you go.
Yeah.
All right, please continue. I don't want to run us out of our
Yeah, I
time.
don't want to run out of time either. So again, going from the environment, we go from there, and I'm sorry, I've lost now my page listing. Health starts on page 13. And if you notice right under health, we did the health hyphen Medicaid. So we separated those two out. So we have the various things regarding to health, like health insurance, the insurance pools, pharmacy requirements. All of that is listed under the health category. And then from the health category, like I say, the Medicaid, which starts on page 16, that is one of the largest unfunded mandates to the various states. It just costs money to keep people healthy. And again, this is the various acts that have been passed over the years that require the states to take up the cost of health care for those who cannot afford it in those certain population groups. After that, we have on page 18 the housing. So the category on housing to include things like housing and urban development. From there, we have human services. And human services also has a hyphenated portion on page 22 for the food stamps program. There are certain portions of the food stamps program where we are required to meet certain costs that then the federal government reduced how much they were putting toward that particular program or set of programs. So the actual unfunded mandate portion has gotten harder on our budget as the years have gone through, and they find ways to reduce their spending. It does put that trickle effect onto the state and county and city governments. Under immigration, which starts on page 23, you have about 6 different, actually 7 it looks like, different mandates. Some of them coming out of the Terrorism and the Refugee Resettlement Acts, and some of them to do with migrant and seasonal workers. So again, some things could come under like agriculture for the migrant and agricultural workers, but we put them all together here in this particular section. Under labor, we have things like the Family Maternity Leave Act, the various things on overtime pay, just various acts that have indeed affected our labor. And this is the portion that I think might also have had we had the opportunity to hear from our various private sectors, we might have had some more to add to this particular segment. Yeah, my goodness, I forgot how big that particular thing was on labor. We don't get to a new category until we reach page 26, which is on law and justice. And I believe it's at the very bottom of the page. No, I'm sorry, it's very top. So law and justice starts on page 26. Got some Homeland Security stuff in there. The Brady Bill is in here. The National Child Protection Act. Civil Rights Act falls under the law and justice. And then we get to the revenue and tax mandates. They start on page 31. That goes for just a couple of pages, and then we go into transportation. As you know, the state of Georgia has had to do a lot of things in the past few years to shore up our own monies to provide for our transportation. So these mandates that go from page 33 to page 37 all revolve around transportation unfunded mandates. So several pages there. And finally, on page 37, we do get to that category called veterans, which I made the suggestion that perhaps we could make it a hyphen under defense. And then finally, at the end, we have miscellaneous, those things that could come under more than one, or we just didn't have a real good fit for these particular categories. So we just grabbed them all together. And again, Tara, you did a beautiful job pulling this report together. She made sure that if there were duplicates, that she removed them. So she had to do a lot of work. And as you know, this being the busy time of year in her department, I just can't stress enough how much I appreciate all of her help and hard work on this. And that is it in a nutshell. What we have remaining is to provide a cover letter as you recommend.
Thank you very much. So the committee, that's what I wanted us to look over today. If there are questions, we'd like to have them. Of course, as Representative said, we would like to augment this or amend it going forward with additional information, from the private sector, as well as if there are any things to add from our folks here in the local government arena. But the idea is we would start here and get this up to DC as they suspect. I think it's only fair, and I suspect if there's some of our friends from local government out there that I'll get a smile when I say this, because as we point our finger at Washington and at them at giving us unfunded mandates, I think we could see our fingers pointed back at us for those things that we do and require our cities and counties to do. And again, some of those things I would argue, even back in the day when I was on a council member or mayor, were needed to do, and they're needed at the city. And if not but for the state doing it, the city would do it. So I'm not sure you'd call that an unfunded mandate. I mean, to take something completely outrageous, if it weren't against the law to steal at the state level, certainly each city and county would pass that on their own. So I guess one could say that the law against theft by taking is to some extent an unfunded mandate, making the counties prosecute that. But most certainly they would do that on their own. There are other things that I think we sometimes do that they would like to at least have a discussion about funding with. On the other side, we would sometimes like to have a discussion with them about what they charge taxpayers that we don't. But is there any comments, questions relative to the report at this point? What I would like to do, I don't know that we have to take any action. What I guess I would ask the committee, is there objection to us forwarding this report as it's been presented today to Chairman Jason Chaffetz in the House. I think. Well, I'm not even going to try to get the exact committee name, but it's the Standing Committee for Government Oversight in the U.S. House of Representatives. If there's no objection to doing that, we will go ahead and forward that report to them. Do you have a question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just for my own, we're just putting together a list of unfunded mandates that we have recognized.
Yes, sir.
That's it.
Yes, sir. And this is without, to be clear, this is not from the Georgia House of Representatives saying we like them, we don't like them. This is not from the Budget and Fiscal Affairs Committee saying we like them or we don't like them. This is what we were asked was to put a list of things together that impacted our state and local governments. These things we believe do, and then some may involve, impact them very, very slightly. Some may be, much more massive. So this is without not asking that. That's why I didn't really feel like it's an action the committee needs to vote on. But if somebody has a strenuous objection, I'd want to listen to it. But it's a report the Speaker asked us to pull together on behalf of the House and send it out. The Speaker's office has seen the same report that's in front of you. They are in agreement that it is a good start of a list, and should we see some of these that we as a legislative body want to take a more stronger stance on, should they be repealed, et cetera, we can do that, in the next session. Perhaps at that time we'll have some more numbers to put on what their cost. But this is simply to go to the committee in Washington to be added data and information for them to review. So if there's not objection, we'll forward the committee. We'll forward the report from the committee. We will do it. Let me ask: is there anyone here? You guys were good to come and see us on Wednesday afternoon with the sun shining outside. Would anybody like to comment on the report or add to it one way or the other? If you'll. Yes.
Tom Gale at the Georgia Municipal Association. We appreciate working with you all to help compile this report. Definitely want to get an electronic copy. I know our members will like to see it in its completed form. I think that it's important for state government, for the federal government, to look at how mandates affect the services that citizens of city and county governments receive. I would, Chairman, you did a lot of hard work over a number of years before you were finally able to accomplish the tax expenditure report that's now a part of Georgia's budget process. And as you know, I don't know if all of your committee members realize this or recall this, but the Office of Planning and Budget works to come up with an estimate of how much all of the tax breaks cost the state of Georgia in estimates of what funds are expended through tax expenditures. And that's part of the Georgia state budget every year now. And I would suggest that perhaps this committee would be well served to try to come up with a similar type of process to have an estimate or put a dollar amount on the unfunded mandates that are imposed to city and county governments. Maybe it would be cumbersome if you do have it broad enough to take into account things like enforcing traffic laws and enforcing crimes. Those are unfunded mandates, but they're mandates that protect our public safety. So some mandates may need to be excluded from purview, but it's some of these other mandates that I think would be important for just for transparency for the legislators, your colleagues, to know how much some of these mandates are costing local governments. So that's just a suggestion. Again, I applaud the work of the committee and be glad to try to be a partner in trying to identify some of these today or tomorrow or into the future. So let us know how we can help.
Thank you. And I say this with my tongue firmly planted in my cheek. Would the gentleman support legislation to mandate that the cities reported on their unfunded mandates? I'm just.
Well, that would be an unfunded mandate.
that was my point to the gentleman. That's good.
But we are willing to help.
No, I certainly believe that's that would be something I think we'd do in partnership rather than
Amen.
at the point of a gun, as they say, so to speak. But no, I understand. I
Thank
think
you.
that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Any questions? If not, I'd like to just share one other thing with the committee, and we'll get this out from our office, or again with Tara's help. But we would normally have, by this time in the session, mentioned what he did about what is called the tax expenditure report that is released every year with the budget. And we will get a link out to that. That is electronically available on the budget website. Tara may have to help me out here. Don't be fooled, because it's going to say, I believe, it may say the tax expenditure report for FY15. Even though, am I right in saying that? It's, yeah, it'll be the last fiscal year, but I think we get it a year behind. So you may see the most recent tax expenditure report may be for FY15, even though we've completed FY16 because of the lag. I know it's at some point the FY15 report I think comes out with the FY16 budget. So when the 17 report comes out, it's going to say FY16 with it. So just don't be confused. When the report started coming out, people thought that if it was with the FY17 budget, it should say the FY17 expenditure report. It
reads FY18 tax expenditure report, but it is for prior.
For the prior year. Okay, so that's what. Don't be confused. It's for the prior year, but it's coming out with the FY18 budget. So it says FY18 tax expenditure report.
The link is on the first page of opb.georgia.gov.
And that's why the gentleman is the vice chairman of the committee. So we'll get that out to everyone. And before we adjourn, we will talk about some of those things and some of the ones that have big numbers. Any further business before the committee? If not, I'll take the direction of the committee, and we will get this report headed, winging its way electronically to our friends up in Washington, in hopes that they will take a look at this and listen to us. If there's no further business before the committee, we'll stand adjourned without objection. Hearing no objection, we'll be adjourned.